Hi guys, welcome back to Eric's Hobby Workshop. In this video I'm going to show you how to make your very own Hive Gang hideout. I'm going to be using mine for Necromunda, but it would be great for Kill Team or look great on any 40k board as well. So let's get to it. Okay, we're going to start this project with a cylinder of oats, but any cylinder will do. Then take some plain cardstock, mark that off, and cut some strips, which are going to help detail our container here. Once I have those strips cut, I'm going to mark a line around the outside of the cylinder. The method I used here is possibly the most imprecise way to do it. That'll bite me in the ass later, but you know what? We're going for it. Glue those strips on with some hot glue. Try to do a better job than me. Measure as you go. I just did this for the camera. I actually made mine quite crooked. But let's not talk about that. Glue those strips down, and you should end up with something like this. Next, we're going to come in with a thinner gauge of strip. I believe this is 1 centimeter, the previous was 2 centimeters, and glue those around the outside to add a little bit more detail. Nice. Next, we're going to take some corrugated cardboard, roll that up nice and snug, and just stick it inside there for a little bit of reinforcement. Sturdy, beautiful. I did the same thing to a plastic jar. Just put some cardboard strips and a little bit of chipboard on the top. Next, I'm going to take some old toys. Some of you from the 80s might recognize these as constructs. I use a little bit of hot glue though, because they don't build in exactly the way I want them, and make a little support structure. Next, I'm going to make a catwalk in a way I've shown on the channel before. If you haven't seen that video on catwalks and bridges, it's here. I basically use some super glue and glue some sculptor's mesh to this toy piece. This toy is a piece called Ruminate, and I got these at the thrift store. I get a lot of questions about that, so there you go. Head them off at the pass, I always say. Cut that to fit. And then glue that on top of my little construct structure. And there's a nice little catwalk. Beautiful. Use some hot glue to glue down my main cylinders. If you hadn't noticed yet, they're going to be tanks, industrial tanks. Yes. Then I cut out a chipboard base, basically as roughly as you can. Nice. I won't use all that space later, but it's a more manageable piece for now. Gives me a little bit of freedom, but not too much bulk. Next, I glue some more constructs down on this side, because I want another platform over here. Can you blame me? A little bit of hot glue should do the trick. Yup, that worked nicely. Okay, starting to see where this is going. So far, so good. Next, I'm going to use some of these toy pipe pieces. I'll link these in the description below, but I use them in a lot of my builds because they're cheap as heck. You can get a huge bag for, $8, something like that, and they last a long time. I cut the piece to length and glue that on with a bit of hot glue. Make a nice conduit between the pipes. Or is that just a pipe? I don't know. I throw terminology around. Next, I'm going to build a little structure with some chipboard, marking the height, applying a bead of glue, and throwing in a side wall. The support column on the other side will do nicely. And just like that, we have a roof. Next, I'm going to switch to chipboard to make some more structures. Since I did a terrible job of filming this, I think I'll point out my new Samsung watch there that my wife bought me. I didn't think I needed one of these, but we've been counting steps, and it really helps to keep us active during the quarantine. So yeah, anyways, I made a little structure. I'm gluing some mesh to the inside of the windows, just to add a little bit of detail. It almost gives them kind of a medieval look, which I think is kind of cool. So I take my little structure that I've made. As you can see, I put a tea light inside. That's going to be cool later, you'll see. But I keep moving around the building. I'm just improvising structures. If you can't tell, I'm making this up as I go along. It's not to code. There is no code. We're in the realm of my imagination, so I add platforms and walls wherever I want them. Little stairs, yeah, stairs there would be good. Mark and cut and improvise and just keep adding walls where you think it'd be good. This is a fun part. Add a little dormer window. Is that a dormer? Have to look that up. Anyways, I had a little window box thing. Nice. And then I start measuring some roofs with chipboard. Snip. Glue. You can see I'm only gluing it down with 4 points of glue. This is because I'm not really sure if I'm going to want to rip it off later and put something inside. Always leave your options open. Nice. Structure's coming together. Starting to look like something cool. Next I'm going to take some more thin cardboard, make some thin strips and some thick strips, and cut it out. In case you couldn't tell this is movie magic, don't cut this fast, you will cut off your finger. Next I'm going to take one of the hard rolls from inside a roll of aluminum foil. Aluminum foil, parchment paper, they all have this good stuff inside it. Thick little cardboard rolls, perfect for crafting. So I glue one of my thick strips on with a bead of hot glue around the end. And then I add a thin strip. The two thicknesses of strips together adds quite a nice little detail. Cut that to length. Cool. Now I take some thin gauge styrene rod. I'll link this in the description as well. I think it's from Plastruct. Stuff's used for model railroads usually. And I cut a lot of tiny little discs. These are going to be rivets. So to apply these, I put a little bead of super glue on a scrap piece of chipboard, and then using the tip of my X-Acto knife, I pick up the individual rivets, sound like a frog there. Pick up the individual rivets, dip them in the glue, and apply them to the pipe piece. It's white on white, terrible contrast. What can I say? It's not Martin Scorsese, okay? I'm just a guy with a camera, figuring this out as I go. Thank you for bearing with me. Apply rivets around the outside. I find doing 8 helps because you can do opposites and then the corners, if that makes sense, and it's easy to keep them well spaced out. There it is. Next I use this little saw to cut that to length. I have to say, after all the hard materials I cut, this is satisfying to cut through because it actually cuts well for once. Cool. So as you can see, I've done the same to some pieces of PVC pipe using the same detailing method. So I glue those together with some hot glue. Glue that on place. Beautiful. Look at that. Back to my structure for a moment. I want to make the roof on this one removable. So I cut a few little pieces of foam board. And then I glue those in place with hot glue. And while the glue is still wet, I put it on there to make sure it fits into the corners. And that worked really nicely. Add another length of pipe down underneath here. And then a little candy cane shaped pipe. Gets a bit of hot glue to feed into it, coming down from the roof there. As you can see, I've used a wooden dowel instead of pipe lengths for that piece. That just adds a nice straighter length of pipe without using up all my pieces. On another one here, I'm going to add a coupling in the middle just to break up that long smooth shape. Cool, 2 pipes feeding down from the roof. Awesome. I'm making another pipe here using the same method, serial box to add some detail, and pipe fittings for the corners and the short length. Come up with something like that. And let's put it over here. Yeah. Cool. You know what would look good here? A staircase. I glue down a scrap piece of, what is this stuff called? Pink foam. Apply a nice set of stairs. These are O-scale styrene stairs, again made by Plastruct. If you want to get some of these, I will link in the description below. That'll be an affiliate link, so it's also a cool way to support the channel. 2 for 1, crafting tricks and supporting your favorite YouTuber. Love it. Always have a model with you as you build to check the scale of things. I had another little structure over here. This one's sort of the main entrance in my mind. and I cut a door in here. Make sure to use 2 knives to look as professional as possible. It's like they say, it's my build, I'll add a door if I want to. Next I used the old sports racket from the dollar store trick to make some ladders. This is the oldest trick in the book, depending on which edition of the book you have. I put one here, connecting that platform to that one there, but you know what? It didn't look right, so I ripped it off. If you want to climb it from there to there in-game, you're going to have to risk falling. Sorry guys. However, one from the ground floor to that platform, I think that'll look nice. Next I cut some super thin strips of chipboard to make some supports. Glue the pieces together, something like that, and add some pieces of chipboard to the end, and you get a nice support strut. I'll glue this on underneath that little structure that was floating on the side of the tank. 3 of different lengths gives a nice ramshackle look. Sweet. Time to trim down the rest of the board. Clean up those edges with an X-Acto knife. Next, let's use some of this corrugated paper. I traced the size of my roofs, cut them out. Okay, switch the orientation, that was bad. And glue them on with some white glue. For something like this, white glue is good because it soaks into these super porous surfaces. Dries nice and stiff. But of course, now that I've said that, I should probably switch to hot glue. Gotta confuse the project, right babe? And I add scraps in different shapes all around my structures to break up those flat surfaces and to add to that nice ramshackle look. Using some super glue, I glue down some pieces of mesh on my platforms and a little piece of diamond plated plastic card. Link in the description. Using a little bit of baking soda helps the glue set and adds some nice gritty detail. Little trick there. Next I had some 3D printed barrels I had lying around. Those add a nice little detail, bring things to scale. Next apply some white glue and very carefully apply some sand. Very carefully. Or just throw it on like I do. Up to you. And shake off that excess sand. Next I'm going to apply a coat of Mod Podge to most of the project. This adds a nice shell. I'm also stippling it onto some of the smoother surfaces just to get a little bit of a coarser texture that's going to hold the paint a little bit better. This adds strength and rigidity to these paper pieces. It also protects any foam pieces from propellants that might be in the spray paint from eating them away. That's a mistake you only need to make once as a crafter, but somehow make every time. Alright, on to painting. Remember, safety first. So I hit that with some flat black Krylon spray paint. And as I've said before, this is my favorite part. Everything comes together. Hit it with a coat of burnt umber. And look at that. We're starting to see the vision. Let's push forward. Next I dry brush on some cheap acrylic silver craft paint. This stuff goes on pretty light. It has a medium in it that's opaque when wet, that dries transparently, giving a translucent effect to the silver paint and showing that burnt umber underneath for a nice weathered industrial look. And so I apply this generously to anywhere I'm going to want to have a weathered metal look. Looking pretty good. Wait a minute, what's that? Oh my god. See that line? Just screams cardboard tube. Gonna have to hide that later on. Next I apply a dark wash to everything. This is a mix of acrylic black paint, water, and a dab of dish soap. It goes on really thick and mottled, but it dries a little bit lighter than it looks right now. This is just going to add some depth to the shadows and some contrast to the recesses. Next up is a rust wash. This is a mix of orange and brown paint, applied very lightly in a very watery wash. Goes on pretty orange but dries pretty subtle. I apply this pretty much all over. If there are any little weird pools that look like a drip, I stipple them out, make sure it dries nice and mottled and thin and subtle. For the next step, I'm going to take some watercolor masking fluid, which is a liquid latex, I believe, but don't quote me on that. And I'll put some of that on my palette, and using the corner of a piece of sponge or packing peanut or something, I pick up a little bit, dab off the excess until I'm getting a nice uneven pattern like you see there. Oh, would you look at that? Okay, this type of peanut is actually dissolving. This is a packing peanut made from corn. Don't use this kind. I repeat, do not use a corn packing peanut. A little bit of sponge will do nicely. So with my sponge, I apply this irregular pattern to the build, trying to focus on corners and areas that would be more rusty. What this is going to do is preserve that rusty texture underneath so that when I paint these areas, there's still some rust chips showing through and I get a nice chipping pattern. I mix up some blue paint. I've been often told by my family members that there's not enough color in my builds. I show people something and it's all grimdark and cool and looks awesome to me, and they go, "Where's the color?" And I go, "It's the grimdark future. What do you want from me?" Then I realized, they're probably right. A little bit of color wouldn't kill me. So here's my attempt at that. And that should silence all future criticism. Thank you very much. So with this bubblegum pop cheerful blue, I apply it to my smaller tank, being careful not to touch the pieces that don't have masking fluid and aren't going to be chipped later on. And for my other tank, I mix up a light gray that ends up just looking kind of like an off-white, but what can you do? And painting that tank in that color. Next, I'm rubbing off the chipping fluid. Using my thumb, an eraser also works nicely, or a nice stiff paintbrush. But as you can see, wherever the chipping fluid was on underneath, the paint comes up fairly easily, and you're left with a nice chipped, weathered texture. Looks pretty cool, I think. There is another method I've seen for chipping that people use sometimes that involves hairspray, salt, and then rinsing it off under the tap after. I don't think that's a good idea with all the paper, chipboard, cardboard that I've used, so I use this method. But I do want to try that in the future if I'm doing something that's all plastic. Alright, there's my chipped up tank. Next step to really sell the realism is to add a rusty wash, dripping down from some of those exposed rust patches. So again, I'm using just a watered down orangey brown paint. And this part's really fun because you start to get some really cool realistic looks. So as I'm doing this, I'm keeping in mind that the larger the patch of exposed metal, the more rust streaks will be under it, because what this is simulating is the oxidized metal being carried away by rainwater, or in this case maybe drips from pipes above, and then depositing lower down on the surface as the water carries it away and deposits it. And there we go. Next step, to add some fine detail, I am going to add some wire. And that is literally just wire. I'm using wire for wire. Not everything has to be transformative, okay guys? So I feed those into little cracks, and then I run them in drooping, looping patterns to where I want them. I feed it under and over details that are already there, and we get a cool effect like that. Nice. At this point I realized I'd forgotten to make doors for all of my open doorways, and since it was the end of the project I decided to cut some corners and mass produce these doors in a way that wasn't entirely unsuccessful. So here I'll show you what I did. I basically made a big strip of doors, and then I just kind of cut them out of that strip. And yes, they are very simple doors, but that's what the in-world architect here had, a minimalist philosophy, okay? Choke on that one. I do what I want. It's not a cut corner if it's a deliberate design choice. That's what I always say. To add some more fine details, I'm going to go to another technique that I've shown before on the channel in my dystopian industrial stack video, which you can see here, and bend some small gauge styrene rod into some nice pipe shapes. And then once that is done, I cut some small strips of cardboard and glue them on for some detail, which results in some nice detailed little pipes, kind of like this. This is time consuming, you get a lot of glue on your fingertips, but it's worth it. Okay, so here's all the extra details that I plan to add. As you can see, we have some doors for that little shanty structure on the left that was neglected before, some dark uprising railings, these phoned in doors, some finicky little pipey bits, less finicky little pipey bit, and a tank from the dark uprising, which I'm not actually going to glue on, but made it its way into the footage. So I do the same as before, prime them black, paint them brown, and then I hit those with a quick dry brush of silver. And I glue those on with Old Reliable, which is the name I've given to my glue gun. If you want a glue gun like mine that will always be there by your side and never betray you, then check the links. You can buy one on Amazon through an affiliate link. Okay, as you can see here, this little shack, I made 2 facades for it, so you can hot swap them out to suit your mood. This one's kind of a little vendor's stall or a store, and this one's just sort of a garagey type storage shed. We're gonna go with this one for now because it shows less of the inside that I didn't do any detail work on. Next I come in with my dark wash and I hit those little pipey bits that I just put on a moment ago just to tie them in with everything else. I dry brush with a gray to make some sooty debris and gunk along the base. And for the next step, I secure those little railing pieces from the Dark Uprising box set. These are super detailed and awesome, and I had them lying around, so I figured I might as well clip them on, because as you can see, they stay on there without any glue. But you don't need to use these. If you check out my video on catwalks and bridges, there's a way of making some cool looking railings with readily available hardware cloth, which you can get at Home Depot or something like that. I plan to magnetize these, but the magnets haven't arrived in the mail yet, so I'll just secure them with a little bead of hot glue for now, just for the photo shoot. And with that final detail added, I'm going to call this piece done. want to take this time to give a huge thank you to my new patrons. Harry Illingworth, Kellen Whetstone, Citizen X, Joseph Hobbs, and Thomas Murray. Thank you all so much. Your support allows me to continue to improve the channel, and I appreciate it more than you can know. Alright, I hope you guys liked that video. If you did, and you know somebody else who might like it, please share it with them. Like, comment, subscribe, put on that notification bell. All those calls to action that I know you are all familiar with because it's pretty common on YouTube. And if you really want to support the channel, check the link below for a link to my Patreon page where you can sign up and join us on there and get access to some secret behind the scenes content as well as work in progress photos and Patreon only videos, of which one is coming very soon that deals with some pretty interesting stuff. So I think you're not going to want to miss it, and I appreciate it a ton. We'll see you next time on Eric's Hobby Workshop.